Shabbat Shalom. Last week, we looked at the word burden and the law being a burden. This week, I think it will be the last word that I'm looking at in the context of the whole grace versus law argument and words that stand out and are used incorrectly in an effort to prove that we do no longer have to do or observe or practice the commandments or the law or the Torah or the Old Testament. So today's word is bound, being bound. And so many folk will say we are no longer bound by the law. And this I'm following on from the passage which we have looked at last week, and I think the week before, from Matthew chapter 11, in which Yeshua says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So last week we looked at the word burden. What does the burden mean? And this week the binding, or the word bound, being bound by the law, and we are no longer bound by the law. And this idea is linked to the yoking. So when Yeshua says, "You take on my yoke," that yoke is the thing that goes over the neck and shoulders of a beast of burden to link two beasts together so that they can pull a load together. And so the yoke is kind of symbolic of a burden, of a heaviness, of a weight, of a drag, of a difficulty. And so Yeshua is saying, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And so the understanding, or this binding, we are bound to the yoke. The yoke is what is carried, which represents the load that is being carried, the weight that is put onto that yoke. And so this whole question of being set free of this weight. So the bonds being broken, and we set free from this weight. So if you've heard the expression, or if you use the expression, we are no longer bound by the law, that would not be incorrect. So the very first mention of the word bound is from Genesis 22, verse 9. And it is when Abraham takes Isaac to be sacrificed, when God commands him to take Isaac and to sacrifice his only son, his the son of promise. We'll get into details about the sons, Ishmael and Isaac. So the son of the promise is to be sacrificed, which seems like a contradiction, given the fact that he's the one through whom the promise is to be made of Abraham being the father of a multitude, as numerous as the stars of the heavens. So Genesis 22 verse 9 says, "Then they came to the place of which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Yitzhak and laid him on the altar on top of the wood." So the Hebrew word, or kad, means to tie with thongs. And I'm not going to go into definitions of the word any further than that, because the majority of usage in the scriptures is that idea of being tied up, of being tied with thongs, of being manacled, of being imprisoned, of being captive, held captive, being by being tied up with ropes or thongs or sinews or fetters. So it is the idea of being tied up. So if we consider the fact that we are no longer bound by the law, that is an accurate statement. That is correct. We are no longer bound by the law. We're no longer tied up by the law. So then the question is, what does it mean to be tied up by the law? Because just immediately, most people will think that means that it is no longer applicable, that the law is the thing that is the bondage, and we are free from the law. We are set free from the law. and therefore it means that we no longer have to observe the commandments. We no longer have to observe the instructions of God, the things that God said in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. Those things are no longer applicable to us living in the Brit Chadashah, New Covenant or New Testament. New Testament times are different to Old Testament times because Yeshua brought in the New Covenant, and so now the rules of the New Covenant are different. It's all by faith, no more works, and so we are set free. We are no longer bound by the law, we are set free. And that is where all understanding goes awry, because we are set free from the bondage of the law. That does not equate to we no longer have to do the things of the law. So therefore the question is, what does it mean to be bound? What is this bondage? What does this word mean? What is the concept of being bound? Hosea 13 is an interesting passage which gives us a hint towards what it actually means, what this being bound means. And I mentioned before, last week, that the word we did the word being under. So we've done keep. What does it mean to keep the law? What does it mean to be that the Lord is not burdensome? We've done the word. What does it mean to be under the law? And so this word being bound is very similar to the concept, not the word, but the concept of being under the law. So Hosea introduces this idea of the concept, and that is Hosea chapter 13, verse 12. The prophet Hosea revealing to Ephraim the iniquity of Ephraim. So you remember, Ephraim represents the 10 tribes of the northern tribes of Israel. So Israel split into two, Judah being the south, and which was Judah and Benjamin, the two tribes in the south, Judah and Benjamin, were separated from the 10 tribes of the north, all the other tribes of Israel. Ephraim being a collective. Ephraim was one of the sons of Joseph, so he was in fact a complicated story, but Ephraim and Manasseh were the two sons of Joseph who got Joseph's blessing, so they've formed part of the 10 tribes. I won't go into all those details, just to say that Ephraim is a collective name for Israel, the northern tribes that were going into exile. So Hosea says, the iniquity of Ephraim is bound up. His sin is stored up. So there is a hint, and this hint is fleshed out further in chapter 7, Hosea chapter 7, verse 2, and also in Deuteronomy 32, verse 34. I'm not going to go and read those verses for the sake of time, but just to say, and you can look them up and read them and confirm what I'm saying to be accurate or inaccurate, however you understand it. But there, in those two passages, as well as this passage, it brings in that the concept, the understanding of the iniquity, your sins, being stored up for the day of judgment. So, in other words, like a record, if you are if you break the civil law of the country, of the land that you live in, then you get a criminal record. So that broken law will be written up in a journal, and it will be kept. If you break the law again 2, 3, 5 years down the line, then it will be added to that, and you will build up a record of sins or crimes against the state. And so each time you commit a crime and add it to your record, so your status, your responsibility as a citizen, your reliability as a citizen of the state gets less and less, until ultimately a judgment is cast against you because of your transgressions. And so what this is saying is a similar thing, where the sins of Ephraim are bound up. His sin is stored up. And this is chapter 7, verse 2, and Deuteronomy 32, verse 34. Moses is lamenting over Israel. It's his last words to Israel before he's going to die, and Israel will go into the promised land. And he's lamenting because God reveals to him that Israel will continue in sin. They will sin, and they will continue, and they will fall, and this will be the consequences. And so Moses is lamenting and says a similar thing, where the sins are stored up to the day of judgment, in which you will be judged. Yeshua says the same thing. Paul said the same thing, where he says, you will be rewarded for what you have done. So both sinners and those who are justified, those who are made right before God, the righteous, they will be rewarded either in judgment or in rewards according to what they have done. And so these things are stored up unto the day of judgment. Okay. Lamentations, I use the word with Moses on purpose because we're coming to Lamentations, which is a book ascribed to Jeremiah. Jeremiah was the prophet who was alive during the time of Judah's exile to Babylon. So we've read Hosea, reference to Ephraim. Now in Lamentations, Jeremiah reveals the story, or tells basically the story of the judgment against Judah, and how he was alive and witnessed the whole destruction of Jerusalem. And Lamentations is really a funeral dirge to Jerusalem. And Lamentations 1, Jeremiah is called the wailing prophet or the weeping prophet because of Lamentations. Lamentations is the only book of the Bible that is from start to finish a heartbreak, a cry of heartbreak, a lamentation. It's the Hebrew word which basically means loud cries or loud shouts. So in English it would be translated lamentations, cries of despair. And so in chapter 1, verse 14, he says, now he speaks in chapter 1, he begins in the third person, describing what's happening to Israel and Jerusalem specifically. And then he goes into the first person. So it's like Jerusalem being personified. So Jerusalem speaking about what is happening to her and why. And he says, Lamentations 1, verse 14, the yoke of my transgressions. So this is Jerusalem now speaking. The yoke, significantly, that word, yoke. The yoke of my transgressions is bound by his hand. So now Jerusalem is speaking about this yoke which has been bound up by his hand. That's God's hand, referring to God. By his hand they are knit together. They have come upon my neck. That's where a yoke goes, over the neck. He has made my strength fail. Yahuwah has given me into the hands of those against whom I am not able to stand. There, the context is of judgment. In Hosea, we saw the context was of judgment. Again, here the context is judgment. It is